I had been driving for hours, exhausted and desperate for a place to rest. It was getting late, and I was in the middle of nowhere in Montana, surrounded by nothing but open fields and a long stretch of highway. When I saw the sign for a motel up ahead, I felt relieved. The neon light was flickering, casting an eerie glow, but I didn't care. All I wanted was a bed and some sleep. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked my car. The motel looked old, like it hadn't been updated in decades, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. The office was empty when I walked in, the bell above the door ringing as I entered. I stood there for a minute, looking around, until an older woman appeared from the back. She gave me a tired smile and asked if I needed a room. I nodded, too tired to make small talk. She handed me a key, attached to a big, plastic tag with the number 12 on it. I took it and paid in cash, then headed back out to find my room. The motel was shaped like an L, with all the rooms on the ground level. I found mine at the far end, away from the office and the other cars parked near the entrance. When I reached the door to room 12, I hesitated for a moment. Something about the place felt off, but I brushed it aside, thinking I was just overtired. I inserted the key, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a mix of something metallic and something rotten. My stomach turned as I stepped inside and reached for the light switch. The room lit up with a dim, flickering bulb, and that's when I saw him. A man was tied to a chair in the middle of the room. His head was slumped forward, and he was gagged, his mouth covered with duct tape. Blood was dripping from a wound on his forehead, staining his shirt and the floor beneath him. He was breathing, but barely. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sick joke? My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step back, ready to turn and run. But then I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway outside. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was trying not to make too much noise. I turned my head towards the door, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped right outside the room. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. The man in the chair looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear, pleading silently for help. I wanted to help him, but I was terrified. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to throw up. The door started to open. I had no time to think. I ducked behind the bed, crouching down as low as I could, praying that whoever was coming in wouldn't see me. The door creaked open, and I heard someone step inside. I peeked out from behind the bed and saw a man enter the room. He was tall, wearing a black jacket, his face shadowed by a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He closed the door behind him and walked over to the man tied to the chair. I could hear the floorboards creak with each step he took. The man in the chair started to struggle, weakly pulling at the ropes that bound his wrists. The man in the jacket ignored him and reached into his pocket, pulling out a knife. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I watched in horror as he raised the knife and held it to the man's throat. He leaned in close, whispering something I couldn't hear. The man in the chair whimpered, and I saw tears running down his face. The guy with the knife stood there for what felt like an eternity, just holding the blade against the other man's skin. I knew I had to do something. If I stayed hidden, that man would die, and I'd be next. But I couldn't just rush him. I had no weapon, no plan. My mind was racing, trying to come up with something, anything that could save us. Then, in a split second, the man in the chair made a desperate move. He kicked out with his leg, hitting the guy with the knife in the shin. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him stumble back, giving the tied man a brief moment to struggle harder against his bonds. I took that chance. Without thinking, I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it as hard as I could at the back of the man's head. The lamp shattered on impact, and he went down, crumpling to the floor. The knife slipped from his hand and skidded across the room. The man in the chair was still tied up, but he looked at me with a mix of relief and urgency. I grabbed the knife from the floor and started cutting through the ropes as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly that it was hard to keep the blade steady. Finally, I freed him. He pulled the tape from his mouth, gasping for air, and started to get up, but he was weak and unsteady on his feet. I grabbed his arm and helped him as best I could, leading him towards the door. We stumbled out into the hallway, moving as quickly as we could. I had no idea where to go, but I knew we had to get away from that room, from that man, before he woke up. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The hallway was empty, and the exit was just a few doors down. We made it outside, into the cool night air, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But we couldn't stop. I could hear footsteps behind us, and I knew he was coming after us. We ran towards my car, but the man I was helping was too weak to move fast. He kept stumbling, and I had to practically drag him. The footsteps were getting closer. I fumbled with my keys, my hands slick with sweat, and finally managed to unlock the door. We both got in, and I slammed the door shut just as the man from the room burst out of the motel entrance, his face twisted with rage. I started the car, my hands trembling so much that I almost dropped the keys. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, speeding out of the parking lot. I didn't look back. I just drove as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. The man next to me was slumped against the seat, breathing heavily but alive. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop until we were far, far away from that place. We drove for miles, the road stretching out endlessly in front of us. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. I glanced over at the man beside me, and he looked back at me, his eyes full of gratitude and fear. I finally pulled over at a gas station, somewhere far from the motel. We sat there in silence for a while, both of us too shaken to speak. Eventually, I called the police, and they came to take our statements. I never found out who that man in the motel was, or why he had been tied up and tortured. I had been driving up the coast for hours, needing some time to clear my head. Oregon's coastline always calmed me, with its rugged cliffs and endless ocean. It was getting late, and the fog was starting to roll in heavy, so I pulled over at the first motel I saw. It was a small place, a bit run down, but it had a view of the sea. That was all I wanted. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I asked for a room. She handed me a key and muttered something about the storm coming in. I nodded, not really listening. I just wanted to drop my bags and get some sleep. My room was at the end of the building, facing the water. It wasn't much, just a bed, a TV, and a small table by the window. After settling in, I stood by the window for a while, looking out at the ocean. The fog was thick, and the waves were crashing hard against the shore. I couldn't see much, just the dark outline of the rocks and the white foam of the waves. It was peaceful in a way, but also kind of eerie. I pulled the curtain shut and decided to get some rest. I had been lying on the bed for about an hour, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Something about the place was making me uneasy. I got up and opened the curtains again, hoping the view would help calm me down. That's when I saw him. There was a figure standing in the parking lot, just barely visible through the fog. He was facing my window, completely still, like he was staring right at me. My heart skipped a beat. I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing games, but when I looked closer, he was still there. I stepped back from the window, feeling my pulse quicken. Who the hell just stands in a parking lot in the middle of the night? I looked again, but this time, the figure was gone. The lot was empty, just the fog swirling under the streetlights. I closed the curtains quickly, feeling a chill run down my spine. I told myself it was nothing, just someone passing through, maybe another guest at the motel. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to brush it off and lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about that figure, the way he seemed to be watching me. After what felt like hours, I finally drifted off, though it was a restless sleep. I woke up to the sound of something tapping on the window. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I had really heard it or if I was dreaming. Then it came again, a soft, deliberate tap. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I slowly turned my head towards the window. The curtains were still shut, but I could see a shadow behind them, like someone was standing right outside, pressing against the glass. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadow shifted slightly, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I had to know what was out there, but I was terrified of what I might see. After what felt like an eternity, I finally forced myself to get up. I crept towards the window, my hands shaking. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the curtain, hesitating for just a second before pulling it back. There was nothing there. The parking lot was empty, just like before. But as I stood there, staring out into the fog, I realized something was wrong. The reflection in the glass wasn't right. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The reflection showed the room behind me, but it wasn't empty. There was someone standing in the room with me. I spun around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. I backed up against the window, my mind racing, trying to figure out what was going on. I had seen someone, I was sure of it, but now there was nothing. I was shaking all over, barely able to think straight. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get out of there, but I was afraid to leave the room, afraid of what might be waiting for me outside. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe I should call someone, but my hands were trembling so badly that I nearly dropped it. I looked at the screen, trying to focus, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. There, in the reflection of the phone screen, was a face. It was just inches from mine, staring right at me. I screamed and dropped the phone, backing away until I hit the wall. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just the empty room and the curtains billowing slightly from the draft. I was losing it. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, not caring anymore about what might be outside. I just needed to leave, be anywhere but in that room. I ran out into the hallway and didn't stop until I was in my car. My hands were still shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to get the key in the ignition. I didn't look back as I sped out of the parking lot, the motel disappearing into the fog behind me. I drove for miles, not caring where I was going, just needing to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. Eventually, I found another motel, this one bright and well-lit, with a lot of people around. I checked in and locked myself in the room, double-checking all the locks before collapsing on the bed. I checked into the motel late last night, somewhere in the middle of Nevada. It was one of those places that barely had a name, just a neon sign flickering in the dark. I was exhausted from driving all day, so I didn't care much about the dingy room or the faded bedspread. I just wanted to sleep. I fell asleep quickly, The kind of sleep where you don't even remember closing your eyes. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I could hear noises outside my door. It wasn't that late, maybe 7 or so, but the sun was already bright through the thin curtains. I could hear the cleaning crew outside, their carts clattering against the walls as they moved from room to room. I lay there for a minute, trying to shake off the grogginess, and realized I hadn't grabbed any towels the night before. I figured I'd ask them for some when they got to my room. I didn't want to leave the room without a shower. It was one of those mornings where you just feel grimy, and a hot shower seemed like the only thing that could wake me up. The noise outside my door got louder, like they were right outside, so I got up and walked over. I didn't even think twice about it, just opened the door with a tired "Excuse me, could I get some extra towels?" But the words stuck in my throat as soon as I saw them. There were 2 of them, a man and a woman. They were dressed in those typical motel cleaning uniforms, pale blue with name tags, but that's not what caught my attention. It was the body bag they were dragging across the hallway floor. It was black, thick, and heavy looking. I froze, staring at it, and then my eyes moved up to their faces. They weren't looking at the body bag. They were looking right at me. For a second, none of us moved. It was like time just stopped, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the woman, the one with dark hair tied back in a bun, smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculating. The kind of smile you see when someone knows something you don't, something terrible. My mouth went dry. I took a step back into the room, instinctively, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. The man, who had been holding the bag, let go of it and started walking toward me. His eyes were dark, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he moved that made every hair on my neck stand on end. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and fumbled with it, trying to dial 911, but my fingers were trembling so badly I could barely hit the right buttons. Before I could get through, there was a knock on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze again, the phone still in my hand. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the door, hoping they would go away. Knocks came again, louder this time. "Ma'am," the woman's voice called out, sweet and calm, like this was all perfectly normal. "We just want to talk to you. Open the door, please." I didn't move. I could hear them talking softly to each other outside, their voices muffled through the door, but I couldn't make out the words. My mind was screaming at me to run, get out of there, but where was I supposed to go? I was trapped in this tiny room, no way out except through the door they were standing behind. I looked around, trying to find something, anything I could use to defend myself. The room was bare, just a bed, a dresser, a small table by the window. My suitcase was still half open on the floor, clothes spilling out of it. Nothing useful. The doorknob rattled, and I heard the man's voice now. "Ma'am, you need to open the door. It's not safe to stay in there." There was an edge to his voice, something almost threatening. I backed up until I was against the wall, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. I hit redial, praying that the call would go through this time. The phone rang once, twice, and then silence. The line went dead. I stared at the screen in disbelief. No signal. I was completely cut off. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, everything was quiet. I thought maybe they had left, maybe I could make a run for it. But then I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart dropped. I had forgotten these places always have master keys. The door creaked open slowly, and I pressed myself harder against the wall, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. The man stepped inside first, his eyes locking onto mine. He was holding something in his hand, something small and metallic. A knife. I could see the blade glinting in the light from the hallway. The woman followed him in, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She was still smiling that same cold smile. "You shouldn't have seen that," she said softly, like she was talking to a child. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My body was paralyzed with fear. They were both just standing there, blocking the only exit, and I knew there was no way out. Not for me. They had come for me, just like they had come for whoever was in that body bag. The man took a step closer, raising the knife slightly, and I finally found my voice. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please, don't." He paused, tilting his head to the side, like he was considering it. Then he lowered the knife and looked over at the woman. "Get the bag," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. She nodded and walked back out into the hallway. I heard her dragging the body bag into the room, the sound of it scraping against the floor making my stomach turn. She dropped it next to the bed and looked at me, her expression almost sympathetic. "We can make this quick," she said. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced them back. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I had to do something, anything, to get out of this. But what? I was outnumbered, trapped, and they were armed. The man moved closer again, and I knew I was out of time. My mind raced, searching for a way out, and then I saw it, the window. It was my only chance. Without thinking, I turned and ran for it, throwing myself against the glass with all my strength. The glass shattered around me as I crashed through, pain exploding in my arms and legs as the shards cut into my skin. I fell to the ground outside, landing hard on the gravel. I didn't stop to think about the pain. I just got up and ran. Behind me, I heard them shouting, but I didn't look back. I sprinted across the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline fueling every step. I could hear their footsteps behind me, getting closer, but I kept running, refusing to slow down. I reached the highway, my lungs burning, and I saw a car coming towards me. I ran out into the road, waving my arms frantically, praying they would stop. The car screeched to a halt, and I threw myself at the door, yanking it open. "Help me!" I screamed, not caring who was in the car, just desperate to get away. The driver, an older man, looked at me in shock, but he didn't hesitate. He nodded and hit the gas as soon as I was inside. We sped away, the motel disappearing into the distance behind us. I collapsed in the seat, shaking all over, blood dripping from my arms and legs. The man asked me what had happened, but I couldn't answer. I just stared out the window, watching as the barren landscape of Nevada flew by, feeling the terror slowly fade, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I had escaped. I was alive. But I knew, deep down, that I would never really be free from what had happened in that motel. That place, those people, they would haunt me forever. I was dead tired after driving all day for work, so I didn't think much about how rundown the place looked. I just wanted to get some rest before I had to hit the road again in the morning. The guy at the front desk was the kind of person you'd expect to see working the night shift at a cheap motel, disinterested, barely looked up from his phone as he handed me the key. Room 106. It was at the far end of the building, away from the few other cars parked out front. It felt isolated, but I didn't mind. I wasn't planning on doing anything but sleeping. The room was exactly what I expected: worn-out carpet, a bed that sagged in the middle, a TV that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. But it was clean enough, or at least I told myself that. I tossed my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked under my weight. As I leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, I noticed the smoke detector. It was one of those old round ones, yellowed with age. But there was something off about it. It was too bulky, sticking out more than it should have. Micah told me to take a closer look, so I stood up on the bed and peered at it. That's when I saw it. A tiny lens, barely visible behind the plastic cover. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a smoke detector, it was a camera. Someone had been watching me. I jumped down from the bed, my pulse racing. Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. Who would put a camera in a motel room? What the hell was going on? I started looking around, trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a mistake, but then I saw the mirror across the room. It was big, taking up most of the wall, and something about it felt wrong too. I walked over, pressing my fingers against the glass. It was cold, like it should be, but when I looked closer, I noticed it wasn't a real mirror. It was one of those two-way mirrors. The kind where someone could be on the other side, watching. My stomach turned. I was being watched. I knew it now. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. My phone was on the bed, but what good would it do? Who could I even call? The front desk guy? He probably wouldn't care, or worse, he might be in on it. I grabbed my bag, throwing everything back in, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there, but as I reached for the door, I hesitated. If someone was watching me, they'd know I was leaving. They might be waiting for me outside. I stood frozen by the door, listening. The only sound was my own breathing, harsh and fast. Then, faintly, I heard something else, a creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. It was coming from the wall. The wall shared with the room next door. I turned back to the bed, my mind racing. The TV. It was an old boxy thing, but what if there was a camera in it too? I crouched down in front of it, my breath shallow, and saw the screws holding the back panel in place. I pried it open with a pen I found in the nightstand drawer, and there it was. Another camera, hidden in the back, pointing right at the bed. My hands were trembling now. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to set this up. I felt exposed, like whoever was watching knew my every move. I had to get out of there, but I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just run out into the night. I pulled the bed away from the wall, looking for anything else that might be hidden. There was nothing under it, but when I moved the dresser, I found another camera, this one wired into the wall. It was pointing straight at the door, capturing anyone who came in or out. I was trapped. They had eyes on every part of the room. My mind was spinning, trying to think of a way out. Then it hit me, the bathroom. I hadn't checked the bathroom yet. I hurried inside and shut the door behind me. It was small, just a toilet, a sink, and a shower. The mirror above the sink looked normal, but after what I'd found in the main room, I wasn't taking any chances. I reached behind it and felt around, but it seemed solid. Then I looked up at the light fixture. It was a simple frosted glass cover, but when I stood on the edge of the tub to look closer, I saw it. A small hole drilled into the side, just big enough for another camera lens. I couldn't breathe. Whoever was watching had seen everything. There was no place in that room where I hadn't been under surveillance. My skin crawled at the thought of it. I had to get out, but I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't let them know I was onto them. I flushed the toilet, washed my hands, trying to act normal. Then I grabbed my bag, slowly unzipped it, and pulled out the shirt I'd worn earlier that day. I walked back into the main room, making sure to stay out of the camera's line of sight as much as I could, and stuffed the shirt under the covers of the bed to make it look like I was lying down. I took one last look around the room, trying to see if there was anything else I could use. Then I noticed a vent near the ceiling. It was small, but big enough to hide something. I climbed up on the dresser to check, and when I pulled the crate off, I saw a small microphone taped to the inside. They could hear me too. My blood ran cold. I put the crate back as quietly as I could, then climbed down. I needed to get out of there, but how? They had me covered from every angle. Then I heard a door opening down the hall, followed by footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was coming. I grabbed my bag and moved toward the door, my heart pounding. The footsteps got closer, stopping right outside my room. I held my breath, listening. There was a soft knock. "Room service," a man's voice said, muffled through the door. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. "Sir, room service." I knew better than to answer. Whoever was out there wasn't from the motel. They were part of this. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The window. It was my only way out. I rushed over, pulling the curtains aside, and saw the parking lot. It was empty except for my car. I fumbled with the window latch, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get it open. The knock on the door came again, harder this time, almost angry. I could hear the doorknob rattling. I shoved the window open and climbed through, not caring how much noise I made. I dropped to the ground outside, scraping my knees on the rough pavement. The door to my room burst open behind me, and I heard footsteps pounding toward the window. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because I knew it did. I reached my car and fumbled for the keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back and saw a man climbing out of my window, his eyes locking onto mine. He started running toward me, but I got the car door open just in time. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could still see his face in my mind, twisted in anger as he realized I was getting away. I drove for miles, not stopping until I was sure I was far enough away. When I finally pulled over, my hands were still shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the fear didn't go away. They had been watching me. Every move, every sound, every breath. I had no idea who they were or why they were doing it, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never be able to trust a motel room again. I pulled into the motel parking lot around midnight, exhausted from driving all day. The place looked old, like it hadn't been updated in decades. The neon sign flickered, casting a dim red light over the gravel lot. The air was cold and crisp, typical for the Colorado mountains at this time of year. All I wanted was to get a room and crash for the night. The lobby was empty when I walked in. It was one of those small, cramped spaces with a counter and a few chairs, and it smelled faintly of mildew. I rang the bell on the desk, but no one came out. I waited for a few minutes, feeling more tired by the second. The whole place felt off, like it had been forgotten, but I was too tired to care. Just as I was about to leave and try somewhere else, a man appeared from the back room. He looked to be in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a slight hunch. His clothes were wrinkled, like he'd been wearing them for days. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said. "I was just finishing up some paperwork." "You need a room?" I nodded, relieved that I wouldn't have to keep driving. "Yeah, just for the night. Nothing fancy." He nodded and reached under the counter, pulling out an old-fashioned key. It was attached to a large brass keychain with a number etched into it, room 217. "This one's available," he said. "Let me help you with your bags." I hesitated for a second. I didn't have much, just a duffel bag, but he seemed insistent. "I can manage," I said, but he was already walking around the counter, heading toward the door. "It's no trouble," he said, smiling again. There was something in his tone that made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I was too tired to argue. We walked out to my car, and he grabbed my bag from the passenger seat before I could stop him. His grip on the strap was tight, almost possessive. "This way," he said, leading me down a narrow path around the side of the building. The room was tucked away, separated from the rest by a few trees and overgrown bushes. It felt secluded, hidden. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, flicking on the light. The room was small and musty, with faded wallpaper and an old TV on a dresser. The bed looked clean enough, and at that point, that's all I cared about. "Enjoy your stay," he said, setting my bag down on the bed. His smile lingered for a moment too long before he finally left, closing the door behind him. I locked the door and leaned against it, feeling uneasy. The room was cold, colder than it should have been with the heater on. I glanced at the key on the nightstand, the brass chain catching the light. Something about it bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I shook off the feeling and decided to get some sleep. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just kicked off my shoes, pulled a blanket over me, and closed my eyes. I woke up to the sound of knocking. It was faint at first, just a soft tapping, but it got louder and more insistent. I groggily looked at the clock, 3:14 a.m. My heart started to race as I realized the knocking wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the walls. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. The knocking was rhythmic, like someone was tapping their fingers against the wall just behind the headboard. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to make sense of it. The sound was coming from inside, like something or someone was trapped. I jumped out of bed, my skin crawling with fear. I grabbed the key from the nightstand and ran to the door, unlocking it as quickly as I could. I needed to get out of there, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I saw him. The man from earlier, standing at the end of the hall, his face shrouded in shadows. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm, almost soothing. I backed away, shaking my head. I heard something in the walls," I stammered, not knowing what else to say. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "It's an old building," he said. "You're probably just hearing the pipes." But it didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like something much worse. I nodded anyway, desperate to get away from him. "Maybe. I think I'm just tired. I'm gonna go." He didn't move. "The roads are dangerous at night," he said. "Better to stay until morning." My stomach twisted. His tone was off, too insistent, and his eyes were cold, calculating. I could feel them on me, watching, waiting. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for the room." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm, his grip tight and unyielding. "Stay," he said, his voice low and menacing. "It's safer." I yanked my arm away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't say anything else. I just ran. I sprinted down the hall, through the lobby, and out into the parking lot. My car was the only one there, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I jumped in and locked the doors, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. I started the engine and slammed on the gas, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from that place. I drove for what felt like hours, not stopping until I was far enough away that the motel was just a distant memory. My hands were still shaking when I pulled over on the side of the road, trying to catch my breath. It was only then that I realized I still had the key in my hand. I looked down at it, the brass chain heavy in my palm. The number 217 was etched into it. There was something else too, scratches, like someone had tried to carve something into the metal. I turned it over, squinting in the dim light. There, barely visible, were 3 words scratched into the surface: "Don't trust him." My blood ran cold. I threw the key onto the passenger seat, my mind racing. Who had written that? And more importantly, who had been in that room before me? I didn't wait to find out. I floored the gas pedal, driving as fast as I could until the sun started to rise. I didn't stop until I found a gas station miles away, where I finally pulled over to collect myself. When I walked inside to pay for gas, I asked the attendant about the motel. He gave me a strange look, shaking his head. "That place," he said, "it's been closed for years. No one's been there since the old manager died." I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded, paid for my gas, and left. I never wanted to think about that place again. I threw the key into a dumpster on my way out of town, not caring where it ended up. I just wanted to forget the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible that night. Something I was never supposed to survive. I was staying in this cheap, rundown motel off a deserted highway in Arizona. It was one of those places where you stop just because you're too tired to keep driving, and it's the only thing for miles. I'd been on the road for hours, and by the time I pulled in, I was barely awake. The neon sign buzzed above me, flickering vacancy in dull red letters. I was too tired to care how creepy it looked. The room was as basic as they come: bed, nightstand, an old TV mounted on the wall, and a small bathroom. The carpet was worn and stained, and the walls were this dingy shade of yellow. But it didn't matter. I just needed a few hours of sleep before I hit the road again. I crashed on the bed without even changing out of my clothes. I remember thinking how quiet it was, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. I didn't think much of it at the time, though. I was out as soon as my head hit the pillow. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding for no reason. At first, I thought maybe it was just a bad dream. But something felt off. I sat up in bed, trying to shake the sleep from my head, and that's when I noticed the room felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and I had this weird feeling like I wasn't alone. I got up to check the door. I don't know why, maybe just to make sure it was locked. But when I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was stuck, like someone had locked it from the outside. My heart started to race. I pulled on it, jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't open. That's when the panic really set in. I moved to the window, thinking I could open it and get out that way. But when I pulled back the curtain, I saw metal bars covering it from the outside. I didn't remember seeing those when I checked in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was going on. I yanked on the bars, but they were solid, no way I could break them. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right in front of my door. Whoever it was just stood there, silent, like they were waiting for something. I backed away, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do. My phone was on the nightstand, but when I grabbed it, there was no signal. I couldn't call for help. I was completely cut off. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear if the person was still there. I could barely make out the sound of breathing, low and steady. They were still there, right on the other side. I didn't want to make any noise, didn't want to let them know I was awake. Then, the handle started to turn slowly, like they were testing it, seeing if it was locked. I backed away, holding my breath. The handle jiggled, but the door didn't open. After a few seconds, the handle stopped moving, but I knew they were still there. I could feel it. I started to think about what I could use as a weapon. There wasn't much, just a lamp, the TV remote, and my car keys. None of them felt like enough. I felt trapped, like a caged animal, and I didn't know how to get out. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they were moving away. I heard them fade down the hallway, and for a moment, I felt a small sense of relief. But it didn't last long. I knew they'd be back. I tried the door again, hoping maybe it was just jammed. But it still wouldn't open. I was stuck. I went to the bathroom, thinking maybe there was a window in there I could use to escape, but it was just as small and barred as the one in the bedroom. I splashed some water on my face, trying to calm myself down, but it didn't help. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and scared, not like myself at all. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. That's when I heard the footsteps again, coming back down the hall. This time, there were more of them, like multiple people. I rushed back to the door, pressing my ear against it. I could hear low voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like they were arguing. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what they wanted. Why had they locked me in here? What were they planning to do? Every scenario I came up with was worse than the last. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. One of them said, "She's still in there. We need to move fast." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I needed to get out of there, and fast. But how? The door was locked, the windows were barred, and I had no way to call for help. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, holding it like a weapon. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I stood by the door, waiting, listening to the footsteps get closer and closer. Then they stopped, right outside my door again. I held my breath, gripping the lamp so hard my knuckles turned white. The handle started to turn again, slowly, almost teasingly. I knew they were going to come in, and I wasn't ready. But then, the handle stopped. There was silence, so thick you could cut it with a knife. I couldn't hear anything, not even breathing. I waited, every muscle in my body tense, ready to strike. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the handle clicked back into place. The footsteps moved away, and the hallway was silent again. I didn't know what to think. Were they gone? Was it some kind of sick game? I stood there for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, exhaustion started to take over, but I couldn't let myself fall asleep. I knew I had to stay alert, had to be ready for whatever was coming next. The hours dragged on, and the darkness outside started to lift. I could see the first light of dawn creeping through the tiny cracks in the curtains. Maybe whoever was out there had left, thinking I was asleep, or maybe they'd be back. I had no way of knowing. As soon as it was light enough to see, I decided to make my move. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and approached the door. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to get out of that room. I turned the handle slowly, almost expecting it to still be locked. But this time, it opened with a soft click. My heart was racing as I pulled the door open, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty. There was no sign of the people who had been outside my room all night. No sign of anyone at all. The hallway looked just as deserted as it had when I arrived. I stepped out, my legs shaking with fear and exhaustion. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand and bolted for the exit, not caring about the noise I was making. I needed to get out of there, as far away as possible. The parking lot was empty, just my car sitting in the same spot I left it. I jumped in and started the engine, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't look back as I drove out of the lot, my heart pounding in my chest. As I sped away, the motel disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed up by the endless desert. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a crowded diner and finally let myself breathe. Even now, I don't know what happened that night, who those people were, or why they trapped me in that room. All I know is that I was lucky to get out when I did. I never went back to that motel, never even drove down that highway again. And I don't think I ever will. I checked into this motel just after dark. It was in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. One of those small, rural places you pull into because there's nothing else around for miles. I'd been driving all day, and my eyes were getting heavy, so I decided it was better to stop than push through to the next town. The place was old, with faded signs and peeling paint. The guy at the front desk was half asleep himself, barely looking up as he handed me the key. Room 12. The room was at the far end of the building, away from the few other cars parked out front. It was quiet, almost too quiet. But I didn't think much of it. I was tired and just wanted to sleep. The room was basic. A bed with a lumpy mattress, a small TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. I dropped my bag by the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. The sheets were rough, but I didn't care. I just needed to rest. I must have fallen asleep right away because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of the door creaking open. My heart pounded as I sat up in the dark, trying to figure out what was going on. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then I heard footsteps. A figure stood in the doorway, the light from the hallway casting a long shadow into the room. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of a man, tall and broad-shouldered. My first thought was that it was the motel manager, maybe coming to check on something, but something about the way he stood there made my skin crawl. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. The man didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, and I saw he was holding a key. "This is my room," he said, his voice low and even. I blinked, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "No, it's not. I checked in a few hours ago." The guy at the desk gave me the key. He shook his head, holding up the key in his hand. "I got this key from him too. Room 12. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no way we both had keys to the same room. I glanced at the door, considering just leaving, but something kept me there, a strange mix of fear and curiosity. "Look, man, there's been some kind of mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Maybe we should go to the office and sort this out." He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with this intensity that made my skin crawl. "I don't think it's a mistake," he said, almost like he was talking to himself. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising with the tension that was building in the room. Before he could answer, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud bang. We both jumped, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I lunged for the door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked, and the key wasn't in the inside lock where I had left it. Panic started to set in as I pulled harder, but it was like the door was sealed shut. The guy was right behind me now, so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. "It's locked," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're stuck in here." He didn't respond. I turned to face him, and in the dim light, I could see his face clearly now. He looked calm, too calm, like this was exactly what he expected to happen. That scared me more than anything else. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the bed and sat down, like he was planning to stay a while. "I'm just a guy who was given a key," he said finally, looking at me with eyes that were too calm, too steady. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to take my eyes off him, but I also needed to figure out a way out of this room. I checked the windows, but they were sealed shut. No way out there. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my distance from him. He shrugged, like it didn't matter. "Why are you?" I didn't have an answer for that. I was just a guy trying to get some sleep on a long drive, and now I was stuck in a room with a stranger who seemed way too comfortable with the situation. I backed away from him, trying to keep the bed between us. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about yelling for help, but who would hear me? The motel was practically deserted, and the walls were thick. Even if someone did hear me, would they care enough to come check? He just sat there, watching me with those calm eyes, like he was waiting for something. I could feel the fear tightening around my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know what to do, so I kept talking, hoping to keep him distracted. "You don't have to do this," I said, though I wasn't even sure what this was. "We can just wait until morning, and then we can go to the front desk and figure this out." He didn't respond. He just kept watching me, his face unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was planning to attack me or if he was just as scared as I was. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I kept my eyes on him, waiting for him to make a move, but he just sat there, calm as ever. Eventually, the fear started to turn into frustration. I was tired, I was scared, and I just wanted out of that room. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He finally stood up, moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps. I tensed, ready to defend myself, but all he did was walk past me to the door. He reached out, and to my shock, the door handle turned easily under his hand. The door swung open with a soft creak, like it had never been locked at all. He stepped into the hallway, turning back to look at me one last time. "See you around," he said, his voice calm and even. And then he was gone, leaving the door open behind him. I stood there for a long time, too stunned to move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to close the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped out of the parking lot. I didn't look back, didn't care where I was going, as long as it was far away from that motel. I was on a solo trip through Maine, looking for some quiet. I'd been driving all day when I came across a small, secluded motel off a narrow road. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. The sign was old and flickering, but I was tired and didn't feel like driving any further. I figured a night here wouldn't hurt. I pulled in, and the parking lot was empty except for my car. The lobby was dimly lit, with dusty furniture and an old desk where the owner was sitting. He was an older man, thin with a tired look in his eyes. He barely looked up as I walked in, just asked for my name and handed me a key to room 5. No small talk, no pleasantries. He seemed eager to get back to whatever he was doing before I interrupted. I noticed a man sitting in the corner of the lobby, just outside the circle of light from the desk lamp. He was slouched in a chair, his face hidden in the shadows. I assumed he was another guest, but he didn't move or acknowledge me when I walked in. I thought it was odd, but I didn't dwell on it. I was tired and just wanted to get to my room. The room was small and musty, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. I locked the door behind me, dropped my bag on the bed, and sat down, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling I had since I walked in. The place was eerily quiet, not even the sound of crickets outside. I decided to take a shower, hoping it would help me relax. The water was lukewarm at best, and the pressure was weak, but it felt good to wash off the day's grime. When I got out, I dried off and changed into some comfortable clothes. I was about to climb into bed when I heard a faint noise outside my room. I froze, listening carefully. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for them to pass. They didn't. They stopped right in front of my room. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it. The footsteps didn't move, just stayed there, almost like someone was standing outside, listening. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but then they started again, this time moving away from my room. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and tried to convince myself it was just another guest heading back to their room. I climbed into bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing things, small creaks and groans, like the building was settling, but every noise made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. Eventually, I drifted off, but it was a restless sleep filled with strange dreams. The next morning, I went to the lobby to get some coffee. The man from the night before was still sitting in the same chair, in the same position, his face still hidden in the shadows. It was like he hadn't moved all night. I hesitated, then decided to try and talk to him. Maybe he was lonely or just as creeped out as I was. I walked over and cleared my throat, but he didn't react. I said hello, and when he still didn't respond, I leaned in a little closer. That's when the owner appeared behind the desk, startling me. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between me and the man in the chair. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice tense. I shook my head and backed away from the man in the chair, suddenly feeling like I'd done something wrong. The owner kept watching me, his expression uneasy. "I was just trying to say good morning," I said, feeling foolish. "You should leave," the owner said abruptly, his voice firm. "Now." I was taken aback. "What? Why?" "I paid for the night." "Doesn't matter," he said, his voice a little louder. "You need to leave. Now." I looked over at the man in the chair, still unmoving, and then back at the owner. Something about the way he was acting made my skin crawl. It was like he was scared, really scared. I decided not to argue. I nodded, quickly went back to my room, and threw my things into my bag. As I was packing, I heard footsteps again, the same slow, deliberate steps I heard the night before. They were coming down the hall, stopping just outside my door again. My hands were shaking as I zipped up my bag. I didn't wait to see if they would move away this time. I grabbed my stuff, opened the door a crack, and peered out. No one was there, but I could still hear the footsteps. I bolted out of the room, not bothering to lock the door behind me. As I rushed down the hall, the footsteps seemed to follow, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel eyes on me, but I didn't stop until I was back in the lobby. The owner was standing by the front desk, his face pale. "You need to go," he said again, his voice shaking now. "Go and don't come back." I didn't need to be told twice. I nodded, almost ran out to my car, and threw my bag in the back seat. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back at the motel. The man in the chair was standing now, in the lobby window, watching me. I still couldn't see his face, but I knew he was looking right at me. The car started, and I peeled out of the parking lot, my heart racing. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from that place. I still don't know what was going on in that motel, who that man was, or why the owner was so desperate to get rid of me. But whatever it was, I'm glad I listened to him. I've never felt fear like that before, and I hope I never do again. I had just finished a long drive through Georgia, heading to a small town I barely knew. It was late when I pulled into a rundown motel with a flickering neon sign. I was tired, and the idea of driving further wasn't appealing. The motel looked old and worn out, but I was too exhausted to care. I went into the lobby, which was dimly lit and smelled faintly of mildew. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a weary face, barely looked up from his paperwork as I walked in. I told him I needed a room for the night. He handed me a key to room 14 without much fuss and told me the room was on the second floor. I grabbed my bag from the car and trudged up the stairs. The hallways were eerily quiet, and the carpet looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. I finally found room 14 and unlocked the door. The room was basic: a bed, a small TV, a tiny bathroom. I didn't bother unpacking. I just threw my bag on the floor, set the alarm for the next morning, and collapsed onto the bed. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately. The mattress was lumpy, and the pillows were flat, but sleep came quickly. I woke up the next morning feeling groggy and disoriented. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite place it. When I sat up, I realized I was in a different room. My belongings were nowhere to be seen. The room was similar to the one I'd had the night before, but the layout was slightly different. The walls were a different color, and the furniture was arranged in a way that didn't match my memory. Panic set in as I scrambled to find my things. My bag, phone, and wallet were all missing. I looked around, thinking maybe I had just misplaced them, but no luck. I headed to the door, hoping to find someone who could explain what had happened. I went downstairs to the lobby, my heart racing. The same clerk from the night before was behind the desk. I approached him, trying to stay calm. "Excuse me," I said, "I think there's been a mistake. I woke up in a different room. All my stuff is gone." He looked at me blankly. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is room 5, not 14. We've never had a room 14 here." I stared at him, confused. "No, I stayed in room 14 last night. I remember it clearly. I have to get my stuff." "Where's my stuff?" The clerk shook his head. "We don't have a room 14. You must be mistaken." This is room 5, and we've never had anyone stay here last night. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. But I was here. I saw you last night. I paid for a room. You have to believe me. The clerk remained unmoved, almost unnervingly calm. Look, we haven't had anyone check in here in days. If you're confused, maybe you stayed somewhere else. We can't help you. I felt my frustration rising. How can you say that? I know I stayed here. I remember everything. I need to call the police or something. This isn't right. The clerk finally seemed to take a bit of pity on me. If you want, you can use the phone. But I can't help you with your missing items. If you're really in trouble, maybe you should contact the local authorities. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I used a phone in the lobby to call the local police. They arrived within 20 minutes and listened to my story. They took my information and said they'd look into it, but their faces showed clear skepticism. They questioned the clerk, who repeated his story about no room 14 and no recent guests. I felt like I was losing my mind. The officers assured me they would investigate, but they couldn't guarantee anything. I went outside and waited for them to finish their questioning. As the sun started to rise, the dread settled into my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The idea of someone moving me while I was unconscious was terrifying. Eventually, the officers came out and told me there was nothing they could do at the moment. They advised me to find another place to stay and to keep in touch with them if I remembered anything new. I thanked them, though I was far from reassured. I found a different motel a few miles away, one that was more reputable and less rundown. I managed to get a room, but my mind was still reeling from the experience. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and why. For the next few days, I tried to put the experience behind me. I avoided that part of town and stayed away from motels. I kept in touch with the local police, but they never found any information that would explain what happened. I never did get my belongings back, and the memory of waking up in that strange room with everything missing haunted me for a long time. I was staying in a motel on the outskirts of Chicago. It was late, and I had been driving all day. I was exhausted and had just settled into my room, which wasn't anything special but was clean enough. The idea of venturing out for food didn't appeal to me, so I decided to order room service. I called the motel's front desk and placed my order. The woman on the other end was polite and assured me that my food would be delivered shortly. I hung up and tried to relax while I waited. The room was dimly lit, and the silence was only broken by the occasional car passing by outside. After a while, there was a knock on the door. I went to answer it, expecting to see the room service delivery person. When I opened the door, a man stood there holding a tray with my food. He looked like he was in his mid-40s, wearing a uniform that said motel staff. I thanked him and reached to take the tray, but he didn't move. Instead, he seemed to be waiting. I took a step back and told him that I'd handle the payment and everything at the door. He smiled, but there was something off about his expression. "I'll just come in and set it down for you," he said. "It's no trouble." I was taken aback. "No, that's okay. I can take it from here," he insisted, his smile not fading. "It's part of the service." I need to make sure everything's to your satisfaction. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something unsettling about his insistence. I started to close the door, but he wedged his foot in the gap, blocking me from shutting it. "Let me in," he said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. "I need to make sure you're happy with the meal." I felt a rush of panic. I pushed against the door, but his foot remained firmly wedged. My heart was pounding in my chest. I tried to reason with him, telling him that I didn't want him in the room. He didn't seem to care. At this point, I was terrified. I tried to push the door harder, but he started to force his way in. I could see his hand reaching around the door, trying to grab the handle. My mind raced as I searched for something, anything, to help me. I glanced around the room and saw the phone. I reached for it and dialed 911 as quickly as I could. The dispatcher answered almost immediately. I tried to speak, but my voice was trembling with fear. "There's someone trying to force their way into my room," I managed to say. "I need help right now." The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. I could hear sirens in the distance, which gave me some comfort, but the man at the door wasn't giving up. He continued to push and shove, and I could hear the door frame starting to crack. Desperately, I grabbed a nearby lamp and used it to wedge the door shut. I pushed with all my strength, but the man's persistence was frightening. He began to shout, cursing and demanding that I open the door. His anger was palpable. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. The man outside must have heard the approaching sirens as well. He let out a frustrated growl and stepped back, but he still lingered outside the door. When the police arrived, they quickly took control of the situation. They forced the door open and apprehended the man, who was now cursing and shouting angrily. I was shaken but relieved to see the officers take him away. One of the officers came over to check on me. I was still trembling, and my voice was shaky as I explained what had happened. They assured me that I was safe now and that they would investigate the incident further. After they left, I was left alone with my thoughts. The relief of being safe was mixed with the lingering fear of what could have happened if I hadn't been able to keep him out. I checked the room thoroughly to make sure there were no other surprises. The rest of my stay at the motel was marked by a constant unease. I kept the door locked and made sure to check the peephole before opening it. I was grateful that the police had acted quickly and that I had managed to stay safe. The next morning, I checked out and left the motel. The experience had left me shaken, and I vowed never to stay at that place again. The fear of someone trying to break into my room would stay with me for a long time. Even now, thinking back on that night, I still get chills. It was a reminder of how quickly things can turn dangerous and how important it is to stay alert, even in what seems like a safe environment. I had never thought much about small-town motels, but a work trip led me and my wife to one in a small town in Nevada. The plan was simple: drive through the night, get some rest, and continue on the next day. When we arrived, it was already late, and the motel looked as tired as we felt. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars. The clerk at the front desk handed us the key to room 12. He seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about him, though I couldn't quite place it. I brushed it off as exhaustion. We made our way to the room, and the place was as basic as you'd expect: a small bed, a tiny bathroom, and old carpet. After a quick dinner, we settled into bed. My wife was tired too, and within minutes, she was asleep. I stayed up for a while, watching TV before finally drifting off. The next thing I remember was waking up to an empty bed. I turned to my wife's side and found it neatly made. Her clothes and personal items were gone. I thought maybe she had gotten up early and gone outside. I called out to her, but there was no answer. I looked around the room, and her things were nowhere in sight. I checked the bathroom and the closet, hoping she was just playing a prank, but nothing. I started to panic. I went outside and looked around the motel. There was no sign of her. I went back inside and tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I went to the front desk to see if anyone had seen her or if she had left a message. The clerk from the night before was still there. I asked him if he'd seen my wife, and he gave me a blank stare. He said he hadn't seen anyone leave the room. I told him I needed help finding her, and he just nodded, saying he'd look around. He asked for my wife's name and said he'd check the security footage. While I waited, I felt my anxiety growing. I paced around the lobby, trying to keep calm. After what felt like an eternity, the clerk returned with a worried expression. The security footage from the night before showed only me entering the room. There was no footage of my wife coming or going. I felt a chill run down my spine. I insisted that she had been with me when we checked in, but the clerk said the footage was clear. I asked to see the footage myself. He showed me a grainy video of me walking into the room. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. There was no sign of my wife. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could she just disappear? I went outside and tried to look around the area, hoping to find any trace of her. The town was eerily quiet, and there was no one around to ask for help. I went back to the motel and tried to make sense of things. I checked the room again, hoping maybe I had missed something, but everything was just as it was before. Feeling desperate, I called the local police. They arrived quickly and listened to my story. I showed them the security footage and explained how my wife had disappeared. The officers were sympathetic but seemed skeptical. They took my statement and said they'd look into it. As I waited, I tried to think of any possible explanation. I thought maybe she had left a note or something, but there was nothing. The police searched the area around the motel. They didn't find anything. Hours passed, and the police still had no leads. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I kept thinking about the clerk and the security footage. I felt like something wasn't right. I tried to retrace my steps, thinking maybe I had missed something, but it was all in vain. Finally, the police had to leave. They promised they would keep searching and keep me updated. I was left alone with my thoughts. I didn't know what to do next. I was afraid to stay at the motel, but I didn't know where else to go. I decided to leave the town and head back home. I packed up the few belongings I had and checked out of the motel. The clerk was still there, but he didn't say much. I drove away with a heavy heart, feeling like I had failed to find my wife. The days that followed were filled with anguish and confusion. The police continued their search, but there were no new leads. I kept hoping for some news, any sign that she was okay. The case remained unsolved, and the mystery of that night in the motel never left me. I still think about that night and the strange way the motel staff behaved. I don't know what happened to my wife, but the lack of answers haunts me. I was driving upstate New York for a weekend getaway and decided to stay at an old motel I found online. The place seemed decent enough for a quick stopover. It was a bit run down, but the reviews were positive and it was cheap. I got there late in the evening and was greeted by a tired-looking man at the front desk who handed me the key to room 16. The room was small and dated, with old wallpaper peeling from the walls and a musty smell in the air. I shrugged it off, tired from the drive, and settled in for the night. Everything seemed normal until around midnight. I was trying to sleep when I heard what sounded like muffled banging coming from somewhere below my room. At first, I thought it might be part of the motel's old infrastructure or maybe even other guests. But the noise persisted, and it sounded like it was getting closer. My curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and decided to check it out. I slipped out of the room and walked down the narrow hallway. The noise was louder now, almost rhythmic, like something or someone was moving around. I reached the end of the hallway where there was a door marked staff only. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from below. I hesitated for a moment. Something about the situation felt off, but I pushed the door open and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was dimly lit, and the air was colder. I could still hear the noises, and now I could tell they were coming from deeper inside. I followed the sound down a narrow corridor. My flashlight beam flickered, making the shadows dance on the walls. The corridor led to another door, which was slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. What I saw made my heart race. The room was large and filled with old, dusty furniture, but that wasn't what caught my eye. Along one wall, there were several cages, small, rusty, and old. The sight was chilling. The cages were empty, but the idea that they might have been used recently was terrifying. I backed away, trying to process what I was seeing. My breath felt shallow, and I turned to leave when I noticed a figure standing at the far end of the basement. It was a man in old work clothes, with a grimy apron. He was looking straight at me, and his eyes were cold and unreadable. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the basement door slammed shut. I was trapped. I pounded on the door and shouted for help, but the man didn't move. The sound of the banging from earlier had stopped, and the basement was now eerily quiet except for my own frantic breathing. I looked around for another way out and saw a small window near the ceiling. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I climbed on a stack of old boxes and managed to open the window. I squeezed through with some difficulty and fell onto the grass outside. Breathing heavily, I glanced back at the motel. The basement door was still shut. I ran to my car, started it, and drove away as fast as I could. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The next day, I called the police and reported what I had seen. I gave them the address of the motel and told them everything. They assured me they would investigate. I left the area and didn't return until I heard from the police. A few days later, the police confirmed that they had searched the motel. They found the basement just as I had described it, but there were no signs of recent activity. They spoke to the motel owner, who claimed that the cages were part of an old renovation project and that he had no idea why they were still there. The investigation didn't turn up much, and the police told me that they couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing. They said the owner's explanation seemed plausible. It felt like they didn't fully believe me, but I knew what I had seen. I never stayed at that motel again and avoided that area altogether. The sight of those cages and the man's expression still haunt me. I don't know if there was something more sinister going on or if I just stumbled upon an old part of the motel that had no business being there. I had been driving across Kansas for hours and decided to stop at a small motel in the middle of nowhere. It was late, and I was exhausted. The place was old and worn out, but it looked like it would do for a night. I checked in at the front desk where a tired-looking woman gave me a key to room 12. The room was exactly what I expected, small, with outdated furnishings and a faint smell of mildew. I unpacked a few things and tried to relax, but sleep wouldn't come easily. The highway was right outside, and the constant hum of passing trucks kept me awake. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on my door. I got up, puzzled, and opened it, but no one was there. I looked down the empty hallway and saw nothing. I thought maybe it was a mistake or someone in the hallway messing around. I went back to bed, trying to shake it off, but not long after, I heard another knock. This time it was louder, more insistent. I went to the door again and found the same emptiness. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I figured it was just someone playing a prank or a maintenance issue. I returned to bed, but sleep was even harder to come by now. I lay there listening to the silence, hoping it was just my imagination. Then, there was another knock, even louder. It startled me, and I got up, feeling a growing sense of dread. I checked the door, and again, there was no one. This time, I decided to wait by the door. I tried to listen closely for any signs of movement in the hallway. The knocking stopped for a while, and I stood there, feeling tense and on edge. My mind raced with all sorts of scenarios. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Just when I was about to go back to bed, the knocking started again. It was deafening this time, like someone was banging on the door with a fist. I jumped up, heart pounding, and flung open the door. I looked up and down the hallway, but there was still no one there. I started to feel genuinely frightened. My logical mind struggled to find an explanation, but fear was making it hard to think clearly. I closed the door and locked it, but the knocking continued, now accompanied by what sounded like footsteps running away. I was getting more and more anxious. The noise was unbearable, and I couldn't tell if someone was trying to break in or just messing with me. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the front desk, but before I could dial, I heard someone running down the hallway toward my room. I froze, my mind racing. I peered through the peephole and saw a figure darting past. My heart nearly stopped. The figure was moving too fast to make out any details, but it was definitely a person running towards me. I didn't know what to do. Should I open the door and confront them? Should I call for help? I felt trapped and vulnerable. I dialed the front desk and tried to explain what was happening, but the call went straight to voicemail. The feeling of isolation grew stronger. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from down the hallway. It sounded like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. I grabbed a lamp from the bedside table, ready to defend myself if needed. I stood still, listening for any sounds. Then, I heard the running footsteps again, this time moving away from my room. I waited a few minutes, heart still racing, before I cautiously opened the door a crack. The hallway was quiet and empty. I stepped out, looking around carefully, but I saw nothing. I walked down the hallway to the nearest exit, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I made my way to the front desk, hoping someone would be there to help. The lobby was empty, and the lights were off. I felt a chill run down my spine. I eventually managed to find the motel owner in the back office. I told him what had happened, and he seemed surprised. He checked the security cameras and confirmed that nothing unusual had been recorded. According to him, the footage showed no one entering the hallway, and no one had been near my room. I was shaken, but the owner reassured me that everything was fine. He said he'd have the place checked out and offered me a refund for the night, but I didn't feel safe staying there any longer. I packed up my things and left the motel. As I drove away, I kept glancing back, half expecting to see someone following me. The experience left me deeply unsettled. I still don't know who or what was knocking on my door, but it was a night I won't soon forget. I've since avoided staying in small, isolated motels and make sure to check the security of any place I stay in. It was a sweltering night in Southern California, and my motel room felt like an oven. I had been on the road all day and was finally looking forward to a good night's sleep. However, around midnight, the air conditioning in my room suddenly stopped working. I was drenched in sweat and could barely get comfortable. I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. The clerk answered, and I explained the problem. He said they would send someone right away. I was relieved, thinking at least I wouldn't have to spend the night in the heat. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and a man in a uniform stood there holding a tool bag. He introduced himself as the repairman and said he was there to fix the air conditioning. I let him in, hoping he would be quick about it. As he worked on the unit, I tried to ignore the heat and get some rest. I watched him from the bed, feeling uneasy. Something about him seemed off. He was unusually quiet and kept glancing at me through the corner of his eye. I could not shake the feeling that he was being too deliberate with his movements, as if he was taking his time on purpose. I decided to call the front desk again, just to confirm that this was really the person they had sent. When the clerk answered, I asked him if the repairman had arrived. To my surprise, he said they had not sent anyone to my room. They hadn't scheduled any maintenance for that night. I was shocked. I told the clerk about the man in my room, and he sounded concerned. He told me to stay on the line while he checked things out. I glanced over at the repairman, who was now standing still, staring at the air conditioning unit with his back to me. His demeanor felt even more unsettling now. My heart was racing as I waited on the phone. The clerk came back and assured me that he would send someone to my room immediately. He also told me to lock the door and stay inside. I hung up and tried to remain calm. The repairman was still working, but he seemed to be taking longer than necessary. I moved quietly to the door and locked it, my hands trembling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I watched as the repairman continued to fiddle with the air conditioning unit, his movements slow and methodical. He kept glancing toward me, making my skin crawl. It felt like he was waiting for something, but I couldn't figure out what. Minutes seemed like hours as I waited for someone to arrive. I kept peeking through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I was too scared to confront the repairman directly. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Why was this man here if the front desk hadn't sent him? Then, I heard another knock on the door. It startled me, and I looked through the peephole. To my relief, it was a security guard from the motel. I opened the door cautiously, and the guard stepped inside. He immediately noticed the repairman and asked for his identification. The repairman hesitated, fumbling with his tools, and finally admitted that he didn't have any credentials with him. The guard then told him to leave immediately. As the repairman walked out, he shot me a cold, calculating look. The guard checked the air conditioning unit and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with it. He said it looked like the repairman was trying to create a situation that wasn't needed. I thanked the guard for coming so quickly and explained everything that had happened. He assured me that the repairman was not affiliated with the motel and that they would investigate how he had gotten access to my room. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the guard stayed with me until dawn. He made sure everything was secure and offered to help me if I needed anything else. I declined and decided to leave as soon as morning came. The thought of staying another minute in that room was unbearable. When I checked out, I made sure to let the front desk know about the incident in detail. They apologized and assured me they would review their security procedures. I drove away from that motel, still shaken and grateful to have escaped without further incident. I later learned that the repairman had been using a stolen uniform and had targeted several motels in the area. The fact that he had been caught and sent away before anything worse could happen was a small comfort. The whole experience left me with a deep sense of unease and a renewed vigilance about staying safe while traveling. I checked into the motel late in the afternoon. It was one of those old, historic places in Pennsylvania that had been around for over a century. The kind of place with creaky floors, heavy wooden doors, and old-fashioned keys instead of key cards. It felt like stepping back in time, which was why I chose it. I thought it would be a nice change from the sterile, modern hotels I usually stayed in. My room was on the second floor, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The walls were thick, and the carpet muffled the sound of my footsteps. There wasn't another guest in sight. The woman at the front desk said it was a slow season, so I pretty much had the place to myself. The room itself was small but cozy. The bed was one of those old four-poster ones, with a heavy quilt that looked like it had been handmade. There was a single window with thick curtains, a small dresser, and a tiny bathroom with a clawfoot tub. The air smelled slightly musty, but not unpleasant. It felt like a place that had seen a lot of life, a lot of stories. I unpacked my things, took a quick shower, and then decided to head out for dinner. The town was small, with a few restaurants and shops along the main street. I found a diner that served decent food and lingered there for a while, reading a book and enjoying the quiet. When I returned to the motel, it was already dark. The place looked different at night, almost eerie. The lights in the hallways were dim, and the silence felt heavier. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the age of the building and my own imagination. I locked the door behind me, got into bed, and turned off the light. It didn't take long before I started hearing the noises. At first, it was just a faint creaking above me. I thought it was the old building settling, nothing unusual. But then the creaking turned into soft thumps, like someone was walking around up there. It was slow and deliberate, moving back and forth directly above my bed. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just the wind or an animal in the attic. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. It would stop for a few seconds and then start up again, pacing back and forth. It felt too rhythmic to be random. I got out of bed, turning on the lamp beside me, and looked up at the ceiling. The sound seemed to be coming from right above me. I remembered the front desk lady saying there was nothing up there but an attic, so I figured maybe she was wrong, and someone else was staying in a room above mine. I didn't think too much of it at first, but it was still unsettling. I tried to go back to sleep, but the noises didn't stop. They went on for what felt like hours, never changing pace. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got dressed and went down to the front desk. The woman was still there, sitting behind the counter reading a magazine. I told her about the noises, expecting her to say that there was another guest above me. Instead, She looked at me with a blank expression and said, "There's no room above yours. Just the attic. We don't use it for anything." I felt a chill run down my spine. I told her it sounded like someone was up there, but she just shook her head and said it wasn't possible. She offered to move me to another room, but I didn't want to make a fuss. I thanked her and went back upstairs, still uneasy. Back in my room, the noises had stopped. The silence was almost worse because now my mind was racing. If there was nothing up there, what had I been hearing? I tried to convince myself that it was just the old building making noises, but it didn't feel right. There was something off about it. I decided to check it out for myself. I knew it was probably a bad idea, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the key from my room and stepped out into the hallway. There was a small door at the end of the hall that I figured must lead to the attic. I walked down there, my footsteps loud in the quiet hallway. The door was unlocked. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it. A narrow staircase led up into the darkness. I turned on my flashlight and started climbing, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The air grew colder as I ascended, and the smell of dust became stronger. At the top of the stairs was another door, this one much older. I pushed it open, and my flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The attic was large, with a low, sloping ceiling. Old furniture was piled up in the corners, chairs, tables, a broken mirror. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for years. But the thing that caught my attention was the fresh footprints in the dust. They led from the door to the far corner of the attic. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed them, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly. In the corner, behind an old wardrobe, I saw movement. My breath caught in my throat. There was someone there, crouched down, hiding in the shadows. I froze, not sure what to do. The person didn't move, just stayed there, watching me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My mind was screaming at me to get out of there, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I took a step back, trying to keep the flashlight steady. "Who's there?" I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. The figure shifted slightly but didn't respond. The silence stretched on, and I could feel the weight of their gaze on me. I knew I had to get out of there. I slowly backed away, keeping the flashlight on the figure the entire time. They didn't follow me, just stayed in the shadows, watching. I made it to the door and practically flew down the stairs, my heart racing. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, the door locked behind me. I sat on the bed, trying to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I knew someone was up there, but I couldn't explain it. I thought about leaving the motel altogether, but I didn't want to go back out in the dark. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I checked out as quickly as I could. I didn't mention the attic to the woman at the front desk. I just wanted to get out of there and put the whole experience behind me. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about the person in the attic. Who were they? Why were they hiding up there? And what would have happened if I hadn't backed away when I did? I'll never know, but I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that I won't be staying in any more old motels anytime soon. I checked into the motel just after dark. It was a small place, nothing special, but it was close to the Canadian border, which was all I needed. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a big smile, her voice warm as she handed me the key. She said she hoped I had a better night this time, which was strange because I'd never been there before. I just smiled back, figuring she had me mixed up with someone else. The room was basic, clean enough, and had that faint smell of old wood and stale air that most motels have. I unpacked my bag, then sat on the bed to check my phone. There wasn't much signal, so I decided to head out and grab something to eat before settling in for the night. As I walked back through the lobby, the woman at the desk looked up and smiled again. She asked if I'd found what I was looking for earlier. I told her I hadn't been out before, and she looked a bit puzzled but just nodded and said she must have been mistaken. I drove into town, found a diner, and had a quick meal. The town was quiet, not much going on, so I didn't stay long. When I got back to the motel, the parking lot was almost empty, and it felt even quieter than before. I locked my car, double-checking out of habit, and went back to my room. I wasn't tired yet, so I turned on the TV, flipping through channels without really watching anything. After a while, I decided to take a shower. The water was hot, and the steam filled the small bathroom quickly, making me feel more relaxed. When I stepped out, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. It was the woman from the front desk, holding a folded towel. She smiled and handed it to me, saying she thought I might need another one after the mess I'd made earlier. I just took it and thanked her, too confused to say anything else. There hadn't been any mess. After she left, I started feeling uneasy. Something wasn't right. I tried to brush it off, thinking she must have been confused or just trying to be helpful. But as I tried off and got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to relax. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a harmless mix-up. But then I started thinking about the way she had looked at me, the way she had spoken like she knew me. It didn't make sense. Sometime during the night, I heard a noise outside my door. It was soft, like someone walking past, but it felt deliberate. I sat up, listening, my heart starting to race. The noise stopped, and then there was another knock at the door. I didn't answer it right away. I was too scared to move. The knock came again, a little louder this time. I forced myself to get up and peek through the peephole. There was no one there. I opened the door just a crack, looking out into the empty hallway. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat starting to form on my forehead. I shut the door quickly and locked it, pressing my back against it for a moment to steady myself. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept thinking about the woman at the front desk. I tried to convince myself it was all just a misunderstanding, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Around 3 a.m., I heard voices outside. They were faint, like someone was talking in low tones, and they were coming from right outside my door. I got up again, moving as quietly as I could, and pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it sounded like two people, maybe more. The voices were calm, almost casual, but something about the tone made my skin crawl. They were talking about me. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I quickly packed up my things, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that I was just overreacting, but my instincts were screaming at me to get out. I cracked the door open, looking out into the hallway. It was empty, but the voices had stopped. I stepped out, my bag in hand, and moved quickly toward the exit. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. As I reached the lobby, the woman from the front desk appeared out of nowhere. She smiled at me, that same too friendly smile, and asked if I was leaving so soon. Her tone was sweet, but there was something in her eyes that made me shiver. I stammered out something about having to leave early, and she just nodded, like she knew all along. She didn't ask for my key, didn't even try to stop me. She just stood there, watching as I hurried out the door. Outside, the air was cold and damp, and the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I unlocked it. I threw my bag in the back seat and got in, locking the doors behind me. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But the road was empty, and the motel quickly disappeared from view. The further I got, the more the tightness in my chest started to ease. It wasn't until I was well out of town, the sun fully up, that I finally started to relax. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been terribly wrong at that motel. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of them, but nothing added up. Whoever they thought I was, whatever they thought I had done, I was glad I never found out. All I knew was that I wasn't going back. I didn't care if it was all a misunderstanding, or if I was just being paranoid. It wasn't worth the risk. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed. I don't want to know. All I care about is that I got out of there before anything worse could happen. And I'm never staying in a place like that again. I arrived at the motel in West Virginia late in the evening, just as the sun was dipping below the mountains. It was one of those old roadside motels, the kind you see in movies with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly. I was tired from driving all day and just needed a place to crash for the night. The man at the front desk handed me the key without much conversation, his face blank like he'd been doing this too long to care anymore. The room wasn't much, just a bed, a small TV, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of mildew. I tossed my bag on the bed and took a quick look around. The carpet was stained, and the wallpaper was peeling in places, but I wasn't expecting luxury. All I wanted was a shower and a few hours of sleep before getting back on the road. After I showered, I noticed something odd about the mirror above the sink. It was bigger than the usual motel mirror, and it looked newer, too. The rest of the room had an old, worn-out feel to it, but the mirror was spotless, with no scratches or signs of wear. I thought it was strange, but I was too tired to give it much thought at the time. I dried off and got into bed, flipping through the channels on the TV. The reception was terrible, with static on most of the channels. I finally settled on a news station, but I wasn't really paying attention. My eyes kept drifting to the mirror on the wall across from the bed. There was something off about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it didn't seem right. Lying there, staring at the mirror, I started to feel uneasy. It was the way it reflected the room, everything seemed to be there, but when I looked closely, I noticed small differences. The angle of the reflection was slightly off, like the room was a little wider in the mirror than it was in reality. And there was a dark spot in the corner of the mirror that didn't match anything in the room. It was like a shadow that shouldn't be there. Curiosity got the better of me, and I got up to take a closer look. As I approached the mirror, I could see my reflection, but it felt distant, like I was looking at someone else. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cool to the touch, but not cold, and it felt thicker than a normal mirror. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but the more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that it wasn't just a regular mirror. I leaned in closer, squinting at the dark spot in the corner. It almost looked like a smudge, but when I wiped at it, it didn't come off. Instead, it seemed to shift, like something was moving behind the glass. My heart started to race as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't just a mirror. It was a two-way mirror, the kind they use in interrogation rooms. Someone was on the other side, watching me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I felt exposed, like I had been stripped of all privacy. Whoever was behind that mirror had been watching me the entire time. They'd seen me shower, get dressed, lie in bed, everything. My skin crawled with the thought of it. For a moment, I was frozen, unsure of what to do. I thought about going to the front desk, but something told me that the man there was in on it. I felt trapped, like I was caught in some twisted game. I needed to get out of there, but I didn't want whoever was watching me to know I'd figured it out. I forced myself to act normal, moving slowly as I packed my bag. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I tried to keep my face calm, just in case they were still watching. I thought about smashing the mirror, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Instead, I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, trying to act like everything was fine. As I reached for the doorknob, I glanced back at the mirror one last time. My reflection stared back at me, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the shadows behind the glass. I left the room as calmly as I could, stepping out into the cool night air. The parking lot was empty, and the neon sign buzzed quietly in the background. I didn't look back as I walked to my car, my mind racing with what I'd just discovered. Once I was in the car, I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. I knew I needed to leave, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. After a few deep breaths, I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror for any sign of movement. As I drove away, I kept thinking about that mirror and what I had seen, or what I thought I had seen. It felt like I had escaped something terrible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind that mirror was still watching me, even as I drove down the dark highway. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, well into the next town. I found a gas station and pulled over, needing a moment to collect myself. As I sat there in the parking lot, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I had no idea who was behind that mirror or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure: I was never staying in a place like that again. The thought of it made my skin crawl, and I couldn't help but wonder how many other people had checked into that motel without realizing they were being watched. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the memory of that dark spot in the mirror, the shadow that seemed to move on its own, stayed with me. Even now, I can't look at a mirror without feeling a twinge of fear, wondering if there's someone on the other side, watching, waiting.